So what's wrong with ambiguity? Well, first of all, it's a lot of work, as you just saw in that example, but it also is very frustrating. It really drags an organization's down speed-wise. It introduces a fair amount of risk because if you make decisions without clarity, you never know what's going to happen. And I'm talking about all kinds of risk: compliance risk, financial risk, legal risk, safety risk, all kinds of risk. And it's very expensive. Every minute that you spend clarifying something, now let's just say you're the information receiver in this case, every minute that you spend clarifying something that could have been more clear to begin with is a minute of lost productivity. And those minutes add up. And if you quantify them into a labor cost perspective, it can add, or not add, it robs an organization of significant time and labor dollars spent on something that you shouldn't really have to do in the first place. So it is a very, very significant problem that needs to be solved in many organizations. So what I discovered was that there are three different types of people in terms of their response and how they operate with seeking clarity or delivering with clarity and asking for clarity if they happen to be an information recipient. So there's clarity pursuers, and I think I was kind of born that way, always want clarity, always seeking the truth, trying really hard to communicate with clarity and that type of thing. So just this constant, almost explicit goal to get to clarity and communicate with clarity. Clarity avoider, I discovered three subtypes of clarity avoiders that go all the way from pathological, where there's like intentional deceit, sociopathic kinds of things, and then into willful ignorance, where it's kind of that, I don't see, I don't hear, I don't, don't want to know. That's willful ignorance, when you really don't want to know something. And unfortunately, a lot of leaders do have elements of willful ignorance because they get overwhelmed with the sheer enormity of what's ahead of them. And it's just, it's not a good habit to get into, because then you're operating with half information at best. And so you have to really try to get the culture to where you will get all the information you need all the time. And then you can figure out what to do with it. At least you have the power then. Without the information, you lack the power to figure out what the priorities really are and what to spend time on and all those things. And in the middle is this type 2 strategic ambiguity. So strategic ambiguity is okay at times. It needs to be strategic and it needs to be very purposeful and not overused. So for example, if a company is looking to possibly acquire another company, you don't want to necessarily go to the rooftops the minute the negotiations start. We're looking to purchase, you don't want to necessarily reveal that. If you're a publicly traded company, you especially don't want to reveal, strategic partnerships and things that you're working on behind the scenes. So there are times to use strategic ambiguity, but the bias needs to be toward transparency as much of the time as is prudent. So just that's the caveat of strategic ambiguity. And then finally, there's clarity blind. And one of the things about clarity blind that's interesting is that, you don't know what you don't know. That is true with clarity blind. What I aimed to do, one of the things in the book, one of the first things I aimed to do in the book was just heighten awareness that this even matters. And that has reportedly, from many, many readers, gotten people to at least get away from being blind to it. And they become aware that it matters, and they're starting to really pay attention to what it feels like to not receive information, or to receive information that's not clear, what it feels like when it is clear, and just the difference in the feeling. And then also that helps them sensitize to their own communication. So the other thing about these three different buckets, no one is always in one bucket. Most people vacillate back and forth. Most people probably primarily in one bucket, but you could be a clarity avoider at work and a clarity pursuer at home, or vice versa. You could be clarity blind about a couple of different aspects in life, but be an avoider in others and a pursuer in others. But I do think that, from what I've studied and met and talked with people, I do think people kind of fall in one of these three buckets, and you can easily move from clarity blind to clarity pursuer. The other thing that gets in our way is biases. There's now 180 plus cognitive biases that have been identified that are natural ways that we operate. And we actually kind of need them because, operating with frameworks help us make sense of this massive amount of information we get. But you have to become acutely aware that you're operating with a bias or operating with an assumption. And that if you can get acutely aware of it and get involved with the study of how we think, called metacognition, META, that study, it's learning how you think and becoming more self-aware that way through all kinds of means. Meditation is a great way to start learning how you think. You can catch yourself in these situations. So what does this say? All right, I bet most of you said jumping to conclusions. Not exactly. So you see, this is a very natural place we go to in our minds, and we have to become more and more self-aware in order to keep ourselves from jumping to conclusions, get the facts, go observe, get data, talk with people, do whatever it takes to get clear on whatever it is that needs to be clarified. And then the biggest thing that we've noticed in organizations that's kind of, pervasive, if you boil it down to one single thing that can really allow ambiguity to thrive and clarity to kind of go undercover, is fear. And what we, see a lot of are leaders that don't want to know the truth. So they, kind of through subtle and not so subtle reactions, start getting their leadership team to realize that, they really can't talk honestly about things. There can be people that get fired for, revealing. I really like these stories you hear about leaders that want to know about every problem there is. And there aren't a lot of leaders out there that actively seek to learn about problems. But the more you do that, the more people become open to revealing what's going on. And a leader, is often really quite blinded by the truth of the current state. When we work with clients, it's shocking how many times a leader has had no idea that something very, very negative has been going on in the organization. What does this all mean? We've talked a lot about organizational clarity. So where do you fit into all this? Well, it takes intention to get anything accomplished. And so having individual intentions to start operating with clarity and having organizational intention to set this culture of clarity and be intentional about that's where you want to go. And then being super clear when someone violates what you're trying to build. So for example, if you decide you want to move this way and you want to be able to start reaping the performance benefits and the just having fun at work benefits of operating with clarity, the minute a leader violates it by creating some kind of a fear-based situation or putting someone down for raising an issue or whatever it might be, you got to stop it. I mean, you've got to have a conversation about that and heighten that leader's awareness that that's in violation of what you're trying to build. And, you can even have a pact amongst a whole leadership team that it's safe to call each other on violations of what you're trying to build, because this is all habitual. This is, it doesn't happen overnight. You don't go from an organization that's kind of, dragging down with some ambiguity to like, whoa, clarity, overnight. It is a habit. And it takes every conversation, every email, everything, every report, it takes working on that to seek and deliver clarity. So having a personal intention is one of the best things you can do. Now, what can you do as a practice? Well, one thing is taking a clarity pause. And so a clarity pause is any time before you speak, before you hit send on an email, before you get on a Zoom call or a phone call, anything is just like taking a moment, thinking about intent. What do I want to deliver in this moment? What do I need to convey? Who's my audience? What kinds of language do I need to use with them? Because you can't talk to executives the way you talk to the front lines. You can't use the exact same words, for example. You can't, frame things in the same way. You have to remember who, like, know thy audience, who is it you're talking with? And then test to see if you're delivering with clarity. Ask people if they understand. I think that one of the most important things you can do is when you're giving any assignment. And by the way, I have my own staff, so I get to practice this stuff every day myself. When I'm giving assignments, I will give the assignment. I'll say, do you have any questions? And then they may ask some questions like, all right, what did I just assign? And it's because I'm trying to make sure that I was clear and that there aren't unasked questions that they either felt shy about or whatever. And boy, it has been, I've been doing this for about 5 years now regularly. It's been fascinating to see when they tell me what I just assigned. Sometimes it's not wildly off, but sometimes it's pretty off, and it's not them, it's me. And so it's I have to get clearer and clearer, and I'm learning a lot about what my team knows and doesn't know, and how they kind of put things contextually together. And I'm trying to build them into leaders that can take over the company as I start moving into retirement someday and things like that. And so I really need them to understand everything, but sometimes they're not at that level yet. So just think about that and think about how you can stop for a moment and be more intentional about delivering clarity.